hello, a quick announcement, I don't know what the fuck. Announcement, pre-announcement, whatever. An announcement before the fucking show. So, as you've probably guessed by now, James has not been on for some time, and, you know, they're no longer part of the podcast. So, you know, if this wasn't obvious, then, but we feel it's right to actually just finally kind of confirm that is the case. We would have done it sooner, but we've been, have you ever dealt with a bank before?
Yeah, it's really good fun. I mean, basically what happened is, like, James is wiser than the rest of us and got sick and fucking tired of following UK politics, you know, with this much obsession and, you know, this much detail, and has gone on to, you know, do more of their actual creative projects, which seems to make them happy. A baffling concept, I know.
Yeah, imagine doing something that's self-fulfilling. Fucked up, if you ask me. So, yeah, that's basically the score there. So, just it was about time to give you like an actual concrete update on it, and that's what we're doing. So, yeah. For those who are fans of the Black Thoughts episodes, those are going to stay on our feed for the next while. You know, I think probably a year, let's say, right? Those will be there for that time, so enjoy them while they're there. They will disappear though because they are a James project in full. Like, entirely, really. So, yeah, that's all James. James may continue that at some point down the line. Who knows? At them, not me, for a change. If you would like more of that, that's...
at both, just to be sure.
Fuck off. But yeah, and obviously, you know, considering, you know, how long this fucking outfit has somehow been going on for, would obviously like to just wish them well on all the future writing and whatever other projects that they stick themselves to.
Yeah, best of luck, and thanks, James.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the content.
Cheers.
Yep, and now on to more shit content. Hello and welcome back to Podcasting is Praxis. I'm Dave, my pronouns are he and him.
I'm Jamie, my pronouns are he and him, and stop fucking DMing me, Rob.
Hi, my name is Rob, my pronouns are he, him,
class.
And no I won't.
And I'm Alistair, my pronouns are also he and him.
I'll just wait until the most famously distractible member of the podcast has introduced himself and then DM him to ask if he can explain the some kind of orange shape meme.
Yeah.
And my name is Dan Hind. Should I introduce myself now? And my pronouns are also he and him.
There are no rules, Dan. There are no rules. We've abandoned.
Well, I just wanted to get that
Actually,
out there. I want to put that in the mix.
No, thank you very much, Dan, for coming on. It has been exactly what anyone should have expected, and yet it's just...
Yeah, here we are.
Far. What the fuck? Yeah, we've 45 minutes now after beginning recording, or at least trying to begin recording, folks. It's been a fun one. So, before we get into the reason that Dan is on, which is to talk about the much loathed BBC and all the things that should be done about it, Rob, you have prepared some nuggets.
Yeah, well, couldn't let today go by without, you know, just checking in with the Online Safety Act, seeing how that's going. Because it's been a day.
This podcast rooted through the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this 2 days ago on the bonus episode, and it's just getting worse.
I mean, can we actually say on the podcast that you can get around this by pointing the face scanner at Norman Reedus in Death Stranding 2?
Oh, we did. Yeah,
we said that already,
that.
so hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
or with any half-decent ad blocker, etc., but also that the interest in VPNs went through the roof, according to all Google search and other metrics. There was a bit in the FT, I think, yesterday that said that half of the top 10 phone apps this weekend in the UK were all VPN related, even displacing ChatGPT from the first spot.
Good. Finally, normality has returned.
Yeah, pornography more important and popular than fucking the AI that burns down forests.
Proton VPN apparently reported an 1,800% increase in daily signups from the UK, which is an incredible fucking jump. And then provided the following incredible quote to the Financial Times. "We would normally associate these large spikes in signups with major civil unrest. So,
you love to see it.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
It's civil war, or your dad can no longer visit Pornhub, but it's probably close." But yeah, all that apparently forced the government to deny that it was not considering a VPN ban, which, good. But then apparently the source for that idea was Guido Fawkes, so fuck those guys, and let's not take them seriously. Yeah. It also gave us some truly incredible YouGov polling over the weekend. Although apparently, if you weren't age verified on Twitter or Blue Sky, you could see this poll because it had the word porn in it, which is amazingly self-referential.
Genius.
Have they blocked David Duchovny?
Oh, you're just walking up to David Duchovny in the street and you just can't see his face because it's blurred out, and you have to put your proof of your age in before it'll unblur.
Yeah, that's an episode of Black Mirror. Apparently, but the results were incredible. That it's normal that most people don't follow the news with sort of the vociferous mania that we do, but 61% of the British public didn't even know that this bill was being introduced or going live last Friday. But when told about it by YouGov, 80% did support quote unquote age verification for porn sites, which I think that's a normal response.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not they then specified this is what it means for you, etc., etc.
Probably not.
But then also, 52% thought that that this bill would not be very or at all effective. So incredibly, most people don't like about it. They do like about it when they hear about it, but they also think it won't work.
This is the same opinion you get from anyone who goes to the shop, tries to buy a bottle of wine, and is then ID'd, despite clearly being overage, but being hit by Challenge 25 or whatever, and then getting real fucking mad because they forgot to bring their ID.
Fuck me, is the challenge age 25 in the UK?
Challenge is 25, but it's 18 to actually get it.
I thought that, but
it's 25, and it is for energy drinks as well.
What?
Yeah, or paracetamol.
If you look 25, they have to check whether you're for an energy drink. I didn't know that.
If they suspect, if they think you look like you might be under the age of 25, you will get ID for an energy drink. Yes, that is true.
Starmer's Britain.
That's incredible. But that polling kind of that all fits together, right? Because no one gives this stuff very much thought most of the time.
Well, no. And the question, it's always, if you read the poll, they asked a bunch of people who hadn't heard about the law whether they supported age verification for porn sites, which is kind of twisting what the law actually is.
Yeah,
a little, right?
Yeah.
But the mention age verification for a porn site is the little pop-up that asks, "Are you over 18?" and then they click yes because they are over 18.
Do you agree with?
It's not a lie.
Do you agree with giving Elon Musk your driver's license to go on Twitter? That would have been a more accurate question, I think.
Yeah.
Then, of course, today's amazing twist and turn was when Nigel Farage and the Reform Party decided to weigh in, and I think it was a press appearance or a speech or something or other. and said he would get rid of the, of the Online Safety Act altogether because right-wing talking point coming up, it leads to the suppression of genuine free speech, which the slide towards dystopia. The government is in control. You say
that is what Labour bought it for, Like,
Did the rest of you see Chris Bryant getting bent extremely out of shape over this earlier today?
Well, as long as it wasn't bent by a hammer, then I think we're good. Otherwise, it's incitement to violence.
Yeah, well, so basically, Chris Bryant, he of Stepping on Rakes fame, was basically saying, Nigel Farage, supports showing children pornography, which was kind of weird, and understandably. Understandably, a lot of people said, "Yo, what the fuck are you talking about?" And I'm just going to read you a little tweet from Chris a few hours ago. I know this is hardly news, but some people on this platform, especially but not exclusively those who are anonymous, are not full of the milk of human kindness. Online, everyone.
Something must be done.
Are you threatening me with lactose intolerance?
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to mention Peter Kyle.
I was just about to come up to that because this is the bit of context that you need to know for Peter Kyle then weighing in, because Nigel Farage says this thing about genuine free speech, blah blah blah. It's just standard right-wing talking points. Apparently, as a brief aside, the Tories were also big mad about this speech because their shadow minister for tech or whatever said that without verifying tweets, you can't see her speech about grooming gangs. So that's why it's important for the Tories now. So just to do it for. But anyway, the Farage thing, which I know you want to get to, Jamie, then led Minister for Technology and noted AI simp Peter Kyle very, very mad, who then went on to Sky News to say, and I'm going to read out the quote in full because it is a series of words. Quote, "We have people out there who are extreme pornographers peddling hate, violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he would be perpetrating his crimes online, and Nigel Farage is on their side."
What I love about this is the implication that Britain defeated paedophilia forever when Jimmy Savile died of old age at 84 in a penthouse surrounded by friends and well-wishers. We didn't kill, but we watched the death of the head vampire, and that solved the problem forever. No further questions. Do you know what I mean? It's there are people like Jimmy Savile are alive today, Peter. And you know what I mean? They're online and offline, as it happens.
Yeah.
And
also,
whether or not
I would encourage more ministers of Keir Starmer's to keep bringing up Jimmy Savile.
There is that as well.
Yes.
I mean, that's I could live to be 1,000 and never do anything as funny as bringing up Jimmy Savile to defend Keir Starmer and his government from reform.
Yeah.
It's gonna play gangbusters with reform voters, the ones that Labour are so desperate to court. Just remind them about Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile, you know what I mean? If he was still alive today, what would Keir Starmer have prosecuted him? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For his use of a VPN.
Presumably they've had a discussion and they've said, we've got to kind of fight fire with reform, right? It's having agreed with them on pretty much everything. They've now said, we've got to pick fights. We've got to kind of go with the populist playbook. And they're coming out with this while Zara Sultana is saying basically Labour is a criminal operation and should be shut down. It's just you guys aren't playing in the same league. Do you know what I mean? It's you just this is,
they are just really, really bad at the one thing they think is important in their lives, and it's great.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
What we'll do is we'll send out a guy whose name is Peter Kyle.
Yeah,
that's going to work.
I mean, they could have said Peter Thiel. I suppose that could be worse.
Fuck's sake, Rob.
Yeah, of course, like when he said this, Farage told him to, like, you know, take it back, you know, essentially, you know, go clean your mouth with soap, basically. He doubled down and then said, if you want to overturn the Online Safety Act, you are on the side of predators. It is as simple as that. And may I say, Time.is told me that this International Tiger Day, so I don't know, man. I think
Stop bringing that up. It's not relevant to the proceedings at hand.
How else is Rob going to know what an orange shape is?
Yeah.
Yeah, but before we stop talking about this, I can't not briefly mention the, like, genuine freak Mike Tapp MP for Bristol and Dover, who is, like, increasingly on my radar as, like, he's just a reform guy with a red hat on, like, it's just insane, and also did 3 tours as an intelligence officer in Iraq and Afghanistan, so, you know, cool. And then worked as a cop, who simply, like, if I said this without telling you that this was written by a Labour MP, why would anyone want to grant strangers and paedophiles unfettered online access to children? ? This government, written with a capital G, protects children! !
Well, that's an interesting thing to note, considering, I mean, how long ago was it that staffer got convicted? Or what was it?
Well, yeah. An assistant to, can't remember genuinely who. But yeah.
Insert 60 seconds of beep while I read out a list of names.
But yeah, like, I mean, seriously, like,
did you say he's the MP for Bristol and Dover?
Yeah. Or it might be just be Dover. I don't know. I'm not good at geography.
It's all basically London, don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's the south, so I'm not sure without looking it up.
It's Dover, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just Dover, isn't it?
Sorry, yeah, it's just Dover. Sorry to the good people of Bristol, but, like, this, like,
yeah, if you're from Dover, fuck you.
Yeah.
Why would anyone want to grant strangers?
Actually, we're probably not allowed to say Bristol on the podcast in case, like, anyone uses it as rhyme and slang now.
But like, why would anyone want to grant strangers in exile and pedophiles unfettered? Like, that's Pizzagate shit. Like, that's genuinely like, that's just OG QAnon Pizzagate insanity. Like, you know, that's like, we are the white hats who protect the children.
I'm not even gonna, like, give this bullshit the dignity of, like, explaining what you would actually need to fucking do if you did want to have children be safe on the internet and keep so that they're protected as best as can be reasonably achieved when they're using stuff online. Like, it's just so patently bullshit. Like, it's not even worth having that discussion, because this government is not interested in protecting the interests of children, because if they were, they would have already scrapped the fucking 2-child benefit cap.
Yeah. But yeah, just as a last little note on this whole business, because I was looking up, you know, the life and career of Mike Tapp MP, and he was featured last year in a Guardian article entitled "Big Brains and Glittering Careers: 5 Fresh Labour MPs to Watch."
Mike Crap, more like.
Damn, got him.
Yeah, there's no coming back from that.
Yeah, brain big because of all of the swelling. That's why he's like this.
Anyway, one more thing before we turn our attention to the BBC, because last week we did a whole long episode on GB Energy. And I mentioned in the course of which that they had, like, a kind of minor but, you know, genuinely not bad scheme, £180 million, to put solar panels on roofs and hospitals to save them each like a couple $1,000. You know, ticky-tacky stuff, but worthwhile doing.
The pittance has been rescinded.
Yes. Yeah. In a truly, like, fucking Charles Dickens ass turn, I'm going to read you a bit from an article in Politico by Charlie Cooper. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has blocked the Department of Education from approving deals to install solar panels on schools.
Well, we can't be giving schools a windfall.
Exactly, because Treasury officials are considering a crackdown which could treat the deals between schools and community energy groups, i.e. the people putting in the actual panels and stuff, as a form of public debt. As such, all agreements have...
sake!
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
Yes.
If a thing exists in the physical world and it is owned by a public institution, by God, that is not an asset. That is a debt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's because technically the way these things are structured, they're called power purchase agreements between like a school or a hospital, like an actual, like, you know, the institution itself and like what is usually a community energy group. So like these are small groups that literally put in solar panels and stuff. And what they do is they install the solar panels on the roof of the school for free, and then they sell the institution to they sell the energy which is generated back to the institution usually at below cost, like below energy cost, like at 80% or something like that. So it is much cheaper in the long run. It's an asset that is owned by these small community groups, which do tend to be like at least regionally, locally specific, you know, local in your area, the stuff that I've been told Labour wants.
Yeah,
obviously
towns,
because there is
growth, etc., etc.
Yeah. But because, you know, these agreements, like, technically you generate a small amount of debt because you have to pay back, you know, the energy cost and shit like that. And I think maybe even the panels, whatever. But, like, right now, that means there could be as much as, you know, so 25 schools have currently been blocked. We were talking last week, I think the average price of like per installation was something around £8,000 or something. So we're talking about like £200,000 at the moment. And, you know, but what if there was a hole in the budget right now?
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely crucial that we stop all of these pennies falling down the back of the sofa, because that is why I can no longer afford a mortgage.
Yes, exactly. It's literally this stupid. And like it gets even dumber because if the government and if the Treasury, I should specify, because I'm sure they will, block these so-called power purchase agreements and reclassify them as public debt instead of just, you know, minor ticky-tacky transaction below the level of like a pallet full of school books, then every single school must seek written permission from the Education Secretary herself, Bridget Phillipson, for every single individual deal.
Incredible.
The Politico article also clearly makes out that like there is no other country in the world that counts these sort of ticky-tacky little deals as part of like the state debt. But then also no other country in the world has a fully privatized water system. So what do you like?
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
I love to have to write a letter to the Secretary of State to ask, can I have a solar panel on the roof, please?
And like, have you considered that this is going to annoy Ed Miliband a lot? So
yeah, I mean that's
always
the point.
Funny.
Yeah, I mean that's
also
the,
funny, but yeah,
that's like the
at a
sole
certain
animus.
Point, that's gonna. It's presumably they are trying to troll him into resigning because. Like, what must it be like to having worked as the Environment Secretary under Gordon Brown to now have Rachel Reeves telling him what it can and can't be done?
I mean, we know,
extraordinary experience.
Well, we know what these people in Labour are like. They just cannot but help themselves try and like pants Ed Miliband at every turn. Because he is ideologically somewhat similar to Gordon Brown, and that is, that's disgusting communism. Yeah.
Dangerous communism, extremism. Yeah.
So like this block was also genuinely like this has to be like planned essentially, because right now, because none of these things can go ahead because of this stupid is it debt or not like thing. All of the again, we're talking about 25 schools. It's ticky-tacky, nothing shit. But like most schools would have installed solar panels over the summer when the children weren't present because of, you know, noise and construction and all that shit. So because it's not done now, even if the Treasury does decide to do it like this, all this stuff will have to be postponed probably at least until Christmas and probably until the next summer when everything is, nice and dry to do roof construction. I don't really know. But, like, you've pushed this at least a year into the future, at least.
Yeah. That's a one surefire way to build confidence with business, I'm sure.
Well, I'll give you one more bit from the article, and then we will start talking about the BBC. Quote, if these Summers projects do not go ahead, quote, a number of community energy organizations will be exposed to significant losses from sunk costs and contracts entered into, which in some cases could have bankrupted those organizations, said the umbrella organization Community Energy England. So not only are we not putting solar panels on roofs for like genuinely sub £25,000 things because of this weird public debt thing, we might actually be instrumentally part of bankrupting a number of like small scale local energy generation projects of the exact variety and type that we A, desperately need, and B, Labour says they are actually interested in pursuing and building up. So well done everybody involved all along the line on this one.
It is I'm impressed to see such a degree of ideological rigidity. It is, every accusation a confession, and
yeah,
you just have to laugh. Like it is impressive the levels of shit that Labour have been in the last year. But not just how shit, but the degree of pettiness. I mean, I don't know why anyone, including us, would have or could have expected anything less or more, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah, if there's a silver lining here, though, this is surely the last days of the Tsar, right? I mean, a system this dysfunctional cannot last, right? It seems profoundly rigid and so obviously absurd at this point that it's going to collapse. It's just a question of what replaces it at this point, surely.
Well, I think that's probably the best possible cue we will ever get to talking about the BBC.
I thought I'd help.
This is an ad break on Podcasting as Praxis. This advert is for the Patreon of Podcasting as Praxis. On the Patreon of Podcasting as Praxis, you will get at least 2 monthly bonus episodes of Podcasting as Praxis, where we discuss lots of topics, including new types of guy, celestial boondoggles, monetising whale shit, and, reluctantly, Scott Paul. You will also be able to join the Podcasting as Praxis Discord, a place to talk with like-minded people about lots of topics, including new types of guy, celestial boondoggles, monetising whale shit, but not Scott Paul, and also, of course, Podcasting as Praxis. If that isn't enough Podcasting as Praxis for you, the Discord also includes a bonus channel where we post the bits that don't make the final cut of the episodes. Fans of both mediocre and bad podcasting have everything to gain by subscribing to the Patreon of Podcasting as Praxis. You will also no longer get ads on episodes of Podcasting as Praxis. £5 a month will get you all of that and maybe more at patreon.com/ you guessed it, PraxisCast. That's patreon.com/PraxisCast, the place where we sell Podcasting as Praxis.
Yeah, so the reason that Dan's on, apart from the pleasure of his company, is he and two whole toms wrote a report about reforming the BBC and transforming it into more of a mutual organization, a certain species of a mutual organization. And I read it, and I think it's genuinely an interesting thing. I have some questions about how this might work in the future, but what I will genuinely say about it, it is refreshing to read something that is sort of out of the box and different than the usual stuff I read when I read, big reports about government policy.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that it didn't fit in quite the same genre as your normal reading, but Yeah, it's called Our Mutual Friend, the BBC in the digital age, and you can find it on the Commonwealth website if you'd like to take a look at the summary and the main report.
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll chuck a link in the description.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. It's basically, this is all in the context of the Royal Charter, that basically the founding document that, outlines the BBC's quote-unquote independence, secures its funding, and gives it its broad mission statement. That is done by a Royal Charter, and it has to be renewed in 2027. And in 2027, it will be exactly 100 years since the first one that sort of laid the foundation for the modern BBC as we know it. This Royal Charter... Sorry, just to interrupt quickly. Please. Fancy version of the history is that the BBC was founded in 1923, but it was created as a private company by radio manufacturers who wanted to produce content to put on the radio to encourage sales of radio sets. It only becomes a public charter corporation in 1927, and which is the same year, by the way, that this country is renamed the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, the modern British state and the BBC are pretty much the same age. They're both 100 years old in 2027. Yeah. The 2007 charter, you quote from it, it makes the BBC's, independence, and we'll get into that, explicit. I'll read you a bit from it. The BBC shall be independent in all matters concerning the content of its output, the timing and manner in which this is supplied, and the management of its affairs. My subnote here just says laughs in Chomsky because,
that makes perfect sense. Just like the Bank of England.
Yeah. You can broadcast in any way you like, so long as it's this specific way.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we'll get into some of the detail of how, that none of that is actually functionally true, but this renewal, again, this 2027 renewal will be sort of extra important because the last one was written in 2017, and not that we weren't all online and insane in 2017, but more people are now.
There was much going on in 2017, to be fair.
But yeah,
this. I mean, I was kind of vaguely involved in the sort of discourse around 2017, and the Conservative government were very, very successful in shutting down public debate about it. As you say, it was already obvious that the digital space was going to be more important, but they managed to completely block out any kind of public deliberation on that. It's not a difficult thing to do to prevent discussion of the media in the major media. The main thing that's changed, I think, since 2017 is just how much independent media there is out there, and how much it's possible to disrupt kind of mainstream media coverage, which includes basically almost total silence about the political economy of the media itself. Which, that's Chomsky all over, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are a handful of people who are interested in this, but there's no major, major recognized publication, however you want to frame that, that talks about that in great detail, obviously with obvious reasons. There's this kind of The Guardian would sort of gingerly go up and prod the issue of the BBC sometimes, and Russ Bridger at Prospect will, to his credit, he will talk about the BBC as an institutional kind of event, as it were. But that's the kind of the very extreme edge of liberal radicalism, is to mention the existence of the BBC, the existence of things like advertising, things like governments in the context of media, right? The right-wing press just spend their time shouting and screaming at the BBC. And the BBC has got this kind of self-denying ordinance where it just will not discuss just what the rest of the media are and how they operate and what they're up to. So it ends up being a very disconcerting public sphere, basically, because no one can really say what's going on.
That's entirely true. They're more than happy to have a look at the media, which is uncritically reading out all the front pages of the tabloids on one of their fucking flagship news programs.
Yeah, I mean, that business of reading out the tabloids is kind of like, it's like kidnap victims reading out a kind of their ransom note or something, isn't it? It's like, please don't hurt me. Yeah. Please don't hurt me. If I read out whatever shit you've put on your front page, can you leave us alone for 5 minutes?
No, is the answer to that, obviously.
I mean, there's something sort of, very, very English about the sadomasochism of the relationships in the BBC and the rest of the media.
I mean, that sort of through line from basically from Guido Fawkes to the Telegraph, to the Times, to the front, to the morning sofa of the BBC is extremely well documented.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and part of the point about trying to think creatively about how you'd restructure the BBC is like, how do you design an institution that could speak truthfully and clearly about the rest of the media system, right? Because unless you're able to critique like the bulk of the media and say, actually, these people are either wittingly or unwittingly, they're lying to you about the nature of the social. Like, if you haven't got a public media system that can do that, then everything goes to shit. Like, it becomes incredibly difficult to figure out what's going on.
I do find it you say it is disconcerting, but there is that sense that with the BBC they have, as we've said, they read out the front pages of the just horrendous bile that is printed in the right-wing press regularly, and they end up having people who are sort of soft left-leaning people saying, "Hey, that's a lot of right-wing stuff you're putting out on your flagship news program," and then you've also got the people on the right who say that the BBC is woke and all that garbage, and the BBC in the middle, or some higher ups of the BBC saying, well, we've got the right and the left yelling at us, so therefore we're doing something right. And it just staggers you, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's been their perennial defense, really. Is if everyone's angry with us, then we must be somewhere in the right place. And I think what's changed, certainly in the last 10 years, is that the great centre mass of people who were kind of persuaded by that argument, that centre mass is kind of disappearing, right? Yeah. Whether people are going to reform or whether they're going to a kind of green left coalition, that space in the middle that the BBC has occupied is being evacuated, right? People don't believe it anymore when it says, oh, actually, if we, if we put both sides on, a completely lunatic crank right point of view and a softly liberal point of view, then we're obviously, we're being balanced. That story that the BBC tells about itself is just like, it's talking to increasingly empty auditoria. And like, the background to this report is the BBC, I think, is in a crisis. It's in a crisis of legitimacy, which is tied up with the crisis of the state, right? I mean, the state's legitimacy and the BBC's legitimacy, they rise and fall together. They stand or fall together. BBC comes out of it's the last great institutional innovation of the British Empire, right? It's a really interesting combination of institutional forms like governing philosophies and technologies around broadcast, which have their origins in imperial administration and naval technology. And as I said earlier, the modern British state and the BBC are kind of coterminous. They sort of start together. The BBC has always taken its cues from the state. The problem it has is that it can't actually say what's blindingly obvious to everyone, which is that the BBC, the British state, is in a crisis and doesn't know what to do. And so we are, one way or the other, the BBC is going to either disappear or it's going to radically change, I think.
I mean, for me, this is like, much as I have genuine questions about whether or not the British state in its current iteration deserves saving, I personally think it doesn't. I think the whole thing is like screwed so much from top to bottom that, like, barring more extreme forms of revolution, which might be interesting to some of the speakers and some of our audience, you cannot continue with Westminster the way it is, with the distribution of power the way it is, and you cannot defend the BBC in its current form like so far. I think as you say, like the BBC and the state are sort of coterminous with each other, and I think the BBC's turn, guided by the politics, of course, towards neoliberalism, towards this sort of quasi-marketed model where the BBC is supposed to compete with ITV, compete with Channel 4, compete with everybody else, with the big commercial players, but at the same time be there for everybody, have an identity that everybody finds soothing and comforting. I don't think it's possible, and I think it's essentially just kind of like be a disaster. And for me, it's like certainly in the age of an ongoing genocide that all of us can see every day on our phone, and I'm trying desperately not to talk about, Starmer's statement today about what Israel should or should not be doing in the next month or so. The BBC and many major other news outlets have just shown themselves to be so disgraceful. Not just disgraceful in lack of reporting, but disgraceful in also ignoring the fact that vast percentage of the audience don't agree with the party line that is so clearly on display. I don't know whether or not this institution is it's definitely not worth saving in its current iteration, but whether or not it is worth saving at all, or if you're trying to repair the master's house with some new tinsel on it, and I just have problems with that.
I mean, I think
I get that. I mean, Machiavelli said. Sorry to interrupt. I mean, Machiavelli said that if you want to change the state, you should pay great attention to the preservation of the names and the forms. People don't like radical change if they can avoid it. And I think if we're thinking about a radical overhaul of the state, I do think that we need to, where possible, keep as much that's familiar in place as we can. Because, the facade has some value. The rooms behind and the kind of the inner, the wiring needs to be ripped out and remodeled. But I think there's a case for keeping the BBC right now. I mean, a few years ago I wrote a paper arguing for the creation of a British digital corporation, which would essentially replace the BBC as a platform operator, as a public digital media entity. And I'm completely agnostic. I don't really care whether you create a new institution or you keep the BBC and just change the wiring. But you're going to need a sophisticated
you do need a state broadcaster or a state media entity, whatever you call it. I agree with that.
Yeah, we're going to need public media of some kind. And while we've got the BBC, it's a useful object of for the reforming imagination. You can look at it and go, well, what would you like it to be like if you didn't want it to be a two Ronnies and genocide machine? You know what I mean? What would it look like if it was serving a democracy? And that is, that's kind of part of the rhetoric of what we're doing, which I think you want to talk to about, why mutualization and why now, right?
Yeah, but if not, it's not an objection, but it's sort of when I look at because in the introduction, and I think later on as well, you quote specifically Lisa Nandy and Tessa Jowell, and I think Ed Miliband or David Miliband, one of the Miliband.
It's David Miliband, the good Miliband, the Miliband over the sea,
the prince who was promised.
Prince,
the man with the rice pudding.
The Arthurian, But anyway, the guy who didn't make it. But
I'll quote you the bit that, or I'll quote our listeners the bit that you cite in the report. This is Lisa Nandy, who wrote a report on the idea of mutualization of the BBC in 2020. I'd like to see us mutualize the BBC so that those decisions are taken by a wider group of people. This will mean a new structure for the BBC board that focuses on genuine public representation and participation. I'd like us to not just move the headquarters of the Channel 4 and the BBC out of London, but the commissioning power too, so that what gets made and what gets said is not determined by a small group of men behind a desk in Westminster and Whitehall, which is sort of very much in line with what your report goes on to say, and it's something that in principle I wholly agree with, but like what I would like to note about David Miliband...
I assume that's a different Lisa Nandy.
Yeah, well, this is quite my point. Is like they both, all three of those guys wrote that while in opposition, and since coming into power, everybody sees that actually controlling the BBC, having control of the purse strings, being able to put the people that you want on the board, Robbie Gibb, for example, or making them directors general of the BBC is actually a phenomenal part of state power, and it's like, why would any incoming government ever give that up? Unless you're like myparty.final.txt finally gets in, but
Yeah. Are you trying to tell me that people in Keir Starmer's Labour Party would say things to get elected and then not do them?
Yeah, well, this was a promise made in 2020 specifically, so,
Oh,
shocking.
Okay.
Could you imagine if, Seamus Milne ended up being, the Director General of the BBC? I can't help but think that would be a very funny reality to inhabit. He of the...
his dad, right? His dad was the Director General of the BBC, I think.
Oh, God, was he?
We haven't got the historian of the BBC, Tom Mills, with us, but yeah, his dad, Alistair Milne, was the Director General who was hoiked out by Thatcher as part of their revolution in the kind of governing philosophy of the BBC. I think Lisa Nandy is a long line, isn't there, of Labour politicians saying things about mutualism to win over the base or win over the membership, because the membership of the Labour Party do think that cooperatives would be a good idea in general. So one of the things you do as an up-and-coming politician is you say nice things about cooperatives, which you may or may not believe. The problem they've got themselves into, it's only a minor problem rhetorically, but we've run with it. The problem is that Lisa Nandy never expected to be the culture secretary when she said the stuff about BBC, right? It never occurred to her that would be her job. And Fangham Debonair...
What if the dog caught the car?
Exactly, right? And Fangham Debonair in Bristol was going to be the culture secretary. She was all set up to take her place in the cabinet as culture secretary, and then those pesky Greens came in and took away the glittering prize. So at the moment we do have a culture secretary who is on the record saying that she would like to mutualise the BBC, right? Which is an interesting situation for her to find herself in, and a way I think of highlighting the potential of BBC reform as well, right? Seriously, in that if you took the principle of mutualism seriously and said that the people who benefit or use a business should be actively and directly involved in its operations, that starts to become a very interesting proposition for us all, right? What would it be like if we were all actively and directly involved in the operations of the BBC? There'd be
a lot more show trials, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, show trials, it's a harsh form of words, right? But one of the things that I'm really interested in is the kind of the entertainment format, if you like, of ordinary people asking powerful people questions over a protracted period of time. Right? Because if you look at the formats in which, quote, ordinary people engage with the powerful on broadcast, right? It's things like Question Time, where you might get to ask a question if you're chosen, right? And then the panel get to kind of show off about the answers. And actually, if you filmed a group of citizens for 3 or 4 hours talking to, say, I don't know, Rachel Reeves about economic policy, that would be a fascinating kind of entertainment genre, right? Because you would see...
I would watch the fuck out of that, I have to say.
I would
it would be amazing, right?
I would try to get tickets to be in that room with Rachel Reeves like every fucking day.
Yeah.
I think they might have a metal detector at the door, though, Rob.
I will dispute the idea that will be interesting, because I think, like, do you know what I mean? Any of the Labour front bench, but especially, like, you know what I mean? Like Starmer and Reeves and
Streeting.
You know, the big hitters. They would all just, like, default to that sort of, like, repeating the same line, like, faulty robot thing that they do. I think you could put them in a room with the public for as many hours as you want.
But you can do that on broadcast, right? Because of the conventions of broadcast, there was that moment where Ed Miliband kept repeating the same line to the pool camera, right? He was asked a question about strikes or something. He kept saying the same thing. And
strikes are wrong at a time when negotiations are still ongoing.
That's the one, right? Yeah. Right? It was kind of seared into our consciousness. And it's very rare that you see that kind of message discipline, that kind of robotic message discipline kind of presented to you on broadcast, right? The truth of the matter is, if you put 30 people in a room with a politician and they stonewall you for 3 hours, right?
Only 30 people will walk out.
Those 30 people walk out and say, no, but they're not just going to walk out. They're going to walk out and say, I don't think this person should be Chancellor of the Exchequer, right?
Yeah.
And they're not saying it as clever dicks. They're not saying it in a kind of, oh, I'm Andrew Neil, I know all about politics. They're saying it in a, this person is not serious. They're not engaging with us as citizens to explain their actions. This is unacceptable, right?
They're definitely not saying it as Andrew Neil, because they wouldn't be saying it from their villa in France. So, you know, that would be the difference to begin.
So, yeah.
To be honest, I would watch this 3 or 4 hour thing just purely to see how long it takes Rachel Reeves to crawl out of her own skin at the idea of being forced to sit with the public.
I don't want to single her out. I think, there's any number of people who have an awful lot
Steve Reed. God, I would torment Steve Reed for like 3 hours. I would pay to do that.
Watch Wes Streeting sweat all the liquid out of his body.
This is part of what needs to happen in a democratic media system, right? Is that you informed and attentive people who aren't, don't have a dog in the fight. They're not trying to climb up the career ladder in Westminster or trying to make a name for themselves in the BBC. People who have other things to do can come in and talk to these supposedly sort of serious and supposedly kind of well-qualified people and ask them, why aren't you letting schools put solar panels on their roofs, right? Why are you doing something which is so bizarre? Can you just walk me through your reasoning on this, right? Because until we create that spectacle, until we create that as a living possibility for elected representatives, they will carry on behaving in these completely weird ways because there's no payback, there's no comeback.
Do you know what I mean?
Anyway, we're getting ahead, but it's a genre of entertainment that I think is long overdue, right? Why on earth do we have to why do we have to engage with the powerful on their terms? Why can't we engage with them on our terms, right? And not be able to ask follow-ups to the point where they have to put their hands up and say, actually, I don't know what I'm talking about. Sorry. You know what I mean? This is the end result.
This is, I mean, in your model, and again, but this is the point where I think this would, for me, this would be fascinating. I think the danger what you'd create is essentially Question Time 2.0, and Question Time is one of the worst things that's on British television.
I don't think it's Question Time. It's Twitter. It's just live action Twitter.
It's live action Twitter, right? But instead of being able to say, "Oh, I'm being harassed by the trolls," right? You would literally have the spectacle of a little old lady asking an incredibly powerful and entitled and rich person why they keep talking shit, right? Yeah. And the idea that these are venomous trolls online who are they're making life difficult. No, these are just people who don't understand why you're behaving in these ways, and they would like to have an answer, right? I think that's an incredibly powerful proposition, and obviously that's clearly not something that the politicians are going to be in a hurry to create.
I do remind you, Jamie, of a line of yours from many years ago and many accounts ago that has just kind of stuck in my head. It's like, well, you're not on Question Time now; you're in the Thunderdome.
Okay.
Anyway, so
the closest we ever got to that was Joe Swinson being asked about the squirrels.
Yeah, that right.
Oh man, that was a humdinger, wasn't it?
To sort of bring it back to sort of the basic concept, essentially. So that Dad, as you were saying, the basic concept is because you, the citizen, you listening, do pay for the BBC through the license fee. Therefore, you should have a legitimate say in how the corporation is run and what it produces. It's a variation on no taxation without representation, essentially. Like that's kind of therefore, And therefore, the idea is a mutual, which I'm quoting from the report. All mutuals provide or aspire to provide empowered participation to their members. So the idea is that people like ordinary citizens, with all the good and the bad that those words entail, would have more of a direct say in the running of the business, not just in its like entertainment side, but also in its news operations, or vice versa, if you prefer that way around. A lot of that would be structured through these I've forgotten the word you used, but these sort of either advisory councils or supervisory councils.
No, there's nothing advisory about them. Oh no.
Sorry.
No, we call them members panels, and they're their bodies. They're like kind of 30 people chosen through random selection who are inserted into the operations and the governance of the BBC in different ways.
Oh, sleeper agents, cool.
I mean, they're not sleeper in that everyone knows what they are and what they're doing.
Preferably, they
act as they act as what Herbert Simon called information processing units. Right? They're bodies that take in information from all directions, including from the BBC, but from independent sources, and then they engage critically with the BBC to ask them difficult questions, and in extremis to get rid of people or issue reports damning bits of BBC coverage or whatever.
And this is sort of
so my point is they're not advisory and they're not consultative, right? They have a defined set of powers within the institution.
But this leads me sort of, because what I wrote as a side note earlier on, and then you made it explicit somewhat later in the document, is this is very much resembling the form of governance sort of citizens' assemblies. One of the most famous ones being the Irish one, which helped legalize abortion. Which, of course, this is not the same, because it's not. I mean, it is political because the media is the message, and all political journalism and all entertainment is political. It can't not be. And I have very serious problems with the concept of citizens journalism. My first one being is if you put 30 citizens picked by lottery, even when remunerated for a salary and serving a term of maximum of 2 years, if I read the report right, will be incredibly dependent on whomsoever is providing the information to then be able to ask the intelligent questions. Because if I put 30 people in a dark room for a year and I fed them nothing but the Telegraph and the Times and the Mail, they'd come up with some questions that would not resemble, if we only fed them this, intellectual powerhouse of a podcast. No. I think it's a really important point, and I'd like to kind of grapple with it. And I don't know whether this is going to persuade you, but I think this is how I respond. Right, these members panels would be self-governing, and they would have a right to appoint their own staff. Right now, the administrative staff for these bodies would come from the BBC. But they would also have an opportunity to bring in representatives from, say, political parties or from NGOs or from any number of civil society organizations. Right now, on a panel of 30 people, about 80% of those people, if polls are to be believed, would, for example, believe in water nationalisation. Right. Going into that, that's the kind of background level of support. Maybe 25% of them, so let's say 8 of them would by liberal centrist standards basically be Bolsheviks or communists, right? They would have very, very left wing views relative to the mainstream media.
right? We've already got a major disconnect between the tenor of coverage and the balance of opinion in society, right? Now, within that group, there would also be people who were much more on the far right side. Now, all of these fractions of opinion that go into the panels would be interested in co-opting experts and advisors in from their point of view. That would be the most natural, normal thing to expect, right? If I was a supporter of the Green Party or a supporter of the Corbyn Sultana project, I'd want someone from that organisation or from those organisations to be advising me about aspects of the BBC's coverage that I'm looking at. So it seems to me there's very little scope for the BBC to capture these panels in terms of the construction of their worldview, right? Much more likely is that the presence of these panels will have an energizing and clarifying effect on BBC journalists, who, in my experience, tend to be incredibly sheltered, incredibly self-assured, and have really no idea what ordinary people think, because what they don't realise, what most upper class people don't realise, is that working class people don't tell them they're wrong because they're right. They tell them that they're wrong because they are daunted by them and they're frightened they'll get in trouble. Right?
Yeah.
Most upper class people meet working class or lower middle class people as paying customers. Right? People don't tell them the truth because people are frightened of them, right? And that's something that these panels will help to rectify, right? It will give an opportunity for ordinary people to engage again with high status people and say, you are wrong about this, and I know you're wrong because I saw it happen, right? I know what happened, and because my uncle was there, or my cousin, I have information that is relevant here.
Yeah, or I'm paying, 3 times as much in terms of water, and the river's still full of shit, essentially.
Yeah. Exactly, right? And I know you've spoken to the lobbyists, and they've given you a really interesting sort of story about how they're doing remediation works and saving the fens or whatever bullshit, right? But I happen to know that my river is still full of shit because I went down there with my dog yesterday, right? And that ability to cut through is almost completely absent now because we are such an unequal society. We're such an unequal society where people have really, again, a lot of upper middle class people have swallowed a really pervasive propaganda about how equal we are, right? Because we all wear blue jeans, right? Oh, we're not like the olden days, right? It's not like the olden days where people wouldn't say anything to a gentleman because they were frightened of being beaten and arrested, right? That's exactly where we are. We have Edwardian levels of economic inequality, and genuinely, most people will not tell senior BBC. They don't meet senior BBC executives except in their capacity as service workers. What are they going to do? Are they going to explain to them what's really going on? Of course not.
Yeah.
So
I suppose that's actually quite a good argument as well for, I typically would lean towards more the idea of it's good to have a BBC rather than the BBC. If we're going to be doing reform work on it, it would be more root and branch, fuck it, do it from scratch. But if you've got the institutional power and you're handing that over to these kind of people and it has the weight of the BBC, then yeah, I guess that does actually make some sense to me, yeah.
I mean, the great advantage of it is that, people understand that the BBC is consequential, right? They still understand that the BBC matters. And so if you invite people into its operations, then they are, they're going to take it that much. Maybe they'll take it a bit more seriously because it's the BBC as opposed to, the British Digital Corporation or, public digital media or whatever you want, whatever the alternative is. Why not just use the brand value and just be like, yeah, no, it's the BBC. It's your BBC, but it really is your BBC. It's not like a slogan anymore.
By the way, that's but we got rid of all the pricks.
You know that slogan, it's your BBC? You know that slogan?
Yeah.
The implication is it's a public possession. Do you know what the BBC is actually? Do you know what it is legally? right?
A miserable pile of secrets.
The BBC, you speak more truly than you know, right? Because the BBC is constituted by the physical bodies of its board, right? In the charter, it says that the BBC is to be understood and identified with the members of its board, right? So the flesh and blood of the people who sit at the very core of the BBC, they are the BBC, right?
The BBC
it is not our
moi.
BBC. Yeah, exactly. Literally, right? Or say no in this case, right? It isn't ours. It's not a res publica. It's not a public possession. It's an embodied corporation, right? Mm-hmm. Which has, I think it has in common the same legal form as the Bank of England and the East India Company. Just to give you a heads up.
The BBC has lost the mandate of heaven.
BBC.
Robbie Gibb in front of a citizens panel having to saying, this flesh is the BBC's flesh, having to surrender himself.
Yes, exactly. We're going to have to make cuts, as it were. No, we're not. We're not. No.
The British Broadcasting Communion.
Well, now we can't use that as a title. Fuck you, David.
Anyway,
but,
so yeah.
Yes. So, but the corollary to this is sort of that this randomly selected panel, I'll quote a bit from the report again, that controls the terms on which it publicizes its deliberations, poses no such threat to the reputation of any of the individuals who constitute it. I think I like that. I think that's good because they, the people who write the reports and give the feedback control the terms of the reporting. That's fine. But I think in the age of doxing, where a couple of years ago, our friends at Realpolitik had their, fucking faces put on was it the Mail, I think, or the Sun, whichever one of them it was. I had 2 pages spread in the Mail.
Yeah.
I think the danger of getting monstered as a randomly picked citizen who has an opinion that does not agree with the Telegraph or worse is very real. And that worries me greatly. That would intimidate, I think, people, because I think the first time you tried something like this, the papers would go after and destroy people who took part in it as pour encourager les autres.
I hadn't. That hadn't occurred to me, to be honest, as a threat. And I think the point is well made. I mean, I think one of the advantages of a public media organization is that you can say, well, actually, the same kinds of public interest prohibitions on reporting on the members panels in the BBC should apply as applied to the members of forensic juries, right? The media cannot report on the constitution or the members of criminal juries, right? You just that is you fuck around with that, you go to jail, right? You the courts take a very, very dim view of doxing, jury members. I think you could put very, very effective safeguards in place against doxing individual members. The other point to make is that the outputs from this need not leave people identifiable, right? You could produce films, you could produce animations, you could produce written reports, you could produce all kinds of things which don't require named individuals to be exposed in that way. And the final thing I'd say on this is if the private media went to war with a democratic media system of the kind that we describe, then it would make Leveson 2 look like a picnic. Right?
Well, I mean, I think functionally the right-wing media has been at war with the BBC for the better part of 30 years, and I'm fairly sure I know who's winning, and I'm also sure it's not the BBC.
It's not really a war if only one side is fighting, right? I mean, the BBC is just not. It just takes its beatings, right? The way that the difference between public media that was owned and operated by the public in the kind of participatory way we're talking about is that it would be able to explore the private media and establish exactly what the private media are, right? I mean, I've just been doing some work looking at Leveson and Leveson 2, and the fact that they were able to park the second, like the important bit of the Leveson inquiry and like essentially cancel it, to me is like, that highlights the point that that's actually where the action is, right? If you want to understand how the state functions, it functions precisely at the point of intersection between the media and the politicians and the police, right? That kind of triangle is where the magic happens. And that's the fact that they were able to say, oh, we're going to obviously do this because it's clear that the tabloid press have been operating as a criminal kind of operation for a decade. And we have to say we're going to do something. And then they were able to massage the discourse to the point where it got dropped without any comebacks. Right? That tells you where real power lies in this country. Now, I'm not sanguine about the chances that this will be introduced wholesale soon, but I think we do have to think about a public media system that is capable of telling the truth about the rest of the media and telling the truth about the nature of the state. And I think if you've got that, then you've got the beginnings of a democracy.
I do come back to like that, that Thomas Friedman quote that like in a crisis, what will be used is the ideas that are at hand. So I think like, while I have my quibbles with some of this report, like I do think this report is important, if nothing else, than to be an idea that is around. And I'm also not surprised that this is published 2 years in advance of this Royal Charter business, because now is the time to get these ideas in the bloodstream for when the reform does eventually happen. So
I think that's right, and I think you should never underestimate the extent to which the policy elite don't have any answers for any of these problems, right? So,
they outsource the actual writing of the actual things, apart from the National Audit Office, who are my beloved friends.
And they won't outsource people to come up with solutions. They'll outsource people to reproduce this kind of neoliberal kind of patois about markets and whatever. So even though they are frantically trying to avoid a substantial conversation about the BBC, the question is whether we can kind of foist one on them, right? Is it possible for a networked public, in the context of an increasing mobilization on the left, is it possible to put the nature and the function of the BBC onto the public agenda in a way that isn't kind of reform inflected, right? Because reform will say, we've got to get rid of the BBC, it's a woke conspiracy, blah, blah, whatever, right? They will, as the right always do, they'll talk noisily and at length about the shortcomings of the BBC. We need a proposition alternative, right, which can say to people, there are lots of things we like about the idea of public media. We know you like certain things about the BBC, but there are ways in which the BBC has to change. And let's say it has to change because we're now moving into the digital age, right? We can't rely on broadcast kind of governance for a platform structure.
The long and the short of it is that the BBC has to change. And if it continues on its current trajectory, it will continue to become less and less relevant as... I hate to use the phrase polarized, but people are seeking out, like we said earlier, alternative forms of media, and in order to actually recapture any of the confidence of the people who might have in the past watched the BBC, they have to do something else, and obviously, I'm definitely in favor of this being, if it's between this and literally anything, the right wing press and reform and all that are going to put out, then obviously this is the preferable choice. But I can't help but feel like it is quite a mountain to climb for the BBC to change its direction in any way, because in order to change just about anything in this country, you either have to break the back of or circumvent the right-wing press, because I think the right-wing press is certainly a component of it, but I think the much more sort of
direct critical one is you cite George Osborne in the report, who just said, I didn't know just like how easy it was to bend the BBC to your will, because like you simply wave the license fee in front of their faces and, you know, they fold because they have no choice. They must fold, or they will, you know, or like the government can just suffocate them, you know, essentially whenever they want to. So like, and the government being so influenced, so controlled, this government certainly, but previous ones as well, by, you know, by the right-wing media. I mean, it's very hard to know where, like, you know, the Daily Mail ends and the Keir Starmer government begins, essentially.
Yeah, it's interesting mentioning Osborne, you know, because like there's an interesting difference between the way that the Conservatives essentially like beat the BBC to a pulp in the 80s and the way in which Osborne's behaving in the 2010s, right? The Thatcherites have a clear ideological project. They're in the business of remaking the British state in order to create a new kind of regime and a new kind of economy of prestige, a new kind of governing social psychology, right? I mean, we can talk about it. I mean, one of the things you realise talking to people high up at the BBC is that these are people who have won in a neoliberal system, and they are essentially deaf to anyone who they don't appreciate as being a winner. And the BBC was reconstructed with much of the rest of the public realm in Britain to be a kind of winner's enclosure, right?
Yes.
And Thatcher and her people knew what they were doing there. That's why they got rid of Milne. That's why they brought Burt in and all the rest of that kind of project and a lot of public bullying, like about, you know, misdemeanors by the BBC. What's interesting about Osborne, it seems to me, is that they're doing this just out of a kind of business as usual reflex, right? Osborne doesn't have a project. He doesn't really know what he's supposed to do as Chancellor. He just knows that you're supposed to kind of, you know, put the BBC in its place. You're supposed to reduce spending, right? This business about the Treasury telling schools they can't put solar panels on schools, right? This is not an ideological project anymore. It's just a set of kind of repetitive gestures, right? They're just doing things on autopilot that are incredibly damaging. And so, like, that's, again, it comes back to this point that I was making earlier. I just like this, it's just not going to last, right? This is going to end.
No, I wanted to sort of bring on to the sort of the second sort of major part of this idea of mutualization, which is that, like, apart from these selected panels, which would have sort of an authoritative influence over the input and the output and the staffing of the BBC, the other would be is to I'll just cite from the report. We propose that individual members of the BBC, which is to say the UK public, have the right to allocate some non-trivial fraction of the BBC's income to journalistic, cultural and educational projects they wish to support. I think later on in the report you cite the sum of £5 per member. I think that's worryingly low, if I'm honest, but
we try not to frighten the horses, but yeah,
and I do like the idea. It's like redistributing, starting with, I think you want to start with 5% of the BBC budget, which is still, sorry, I forget the number off the top of my head, but it's still like a significant number of millions of pounds that would be able to be spent by individual members. But like, how do you, without getting too lost in the weeds, what I sort of see in front of me is like Kickstarter, but for the BBC, and Kickstarter projects have, you know, to put it mildly, questionable outputs.
Yeah, no, so I was thinking about this, and again, it's like, I think it's really helpful to have someone read and think about what you've written, because it's not something you necessarily get from major media outlets all the time. But the way I would see it is that the BBC would have a platform capability, right? I mean, the BBC doesn't at the moment have a platform of any kind. It has iPlayer. But the ability to engage with other members of the BBC, the ability to engage with the BBC or communicate with the BBC is very limited. It's a streaming service, but it could be an all singing, all dancing social media platform, or it could be somewhere in between. Now, all that you would mean is that every 6 months or every year, you would just you'd go to you'd go to your list of media outlets that you follow or media outlets that you've liked over the last year or whatever, and then you decide which one that you were going to give your little quantum of editorial support to, right? A little bit of commissioning power that you have, you'd give it to an outlet, a podcast, perhaps. I don't know. You give it to a media outlet that you like, that had registered for the scheme and had met sort of a fairly low bar in order to be eligible for the receipt of public funds. So it's not like millions upon millions of individual crowdfunding efforts. It's just an ordinary part of being a member of the BBC, is that every now and again you give a bit of money to a media outlet that you want to support. It's a bit getting a token for Patreon.
It's a little bit earlier in the report, but I did genuinely love the suggestion that the BBC should be a big player, or at least a player in stuff like, to sort of Twitch streaming games and that kind of media. And just the idea of Alistair and Jamie streaming some insane game on the BBC just has that pleases me greatly.
Well, the
BBC doesn't know what is missing with Control F gun.
Yeah.
I think that's probably my co-authors who put that in. I think it's an outrageous suggestion. There's a huge range of things that the BBC's not doing in the digital space, partly because of this sort of neoliberal rhetoric around the need to promote competition in the private sector and so on. But obviously that is unsustainable, right? The BBC is going to have to move into spaces where audiences are gravitating, otherwise it will be residualized. So that's the thinking behind what's essentially a voucher scheme, right? Is that you give people a little bit of discretionary purchasing power, if you like, in order to sort of lend support to points of view that you find personally are underrepresented or that deserve your support. Now, the crucial thing to say is that, just because something gets money, that doesn't mean it's going to win all the arguments, right?
Yeah.
The point is that if you, I was thinking about this earlier, right? If you're a billionaire, it's not enough to buy a journalist, right? You have to own the whole media system, right? It's it's putting on a play, right? You can't just have an actor. You have to have the whole cast, and you have to have the technical crew, and you have to have the guy who does the lighting. You have to have the whole thing, right? And then you can stage within that your version of, dissent or dispute or, a clash of ideas, right? This is, again, Chomsky idea of a narrow spectrum of genuine debate is the most effective form of propaganda, right?
Yeah, I think you could summarize that possibly as democracy dies in darkness or something.
You're right. So if you introduce the possibility that, I don't know, deep green or radical Marxist or radical anarchist or whatever it happens to be, underrepresented forms of discourse, underrepresented points of view, if you get them over the hurdle of being able to assemble a kind of a news product or a series of news products by giving them public patronage, then that puts that stuff into this zone of debate, right? It's no longer up to commissioning editors to say, yes, we've looked at their work and we don't think it's serious, we don't think it stacks up, right? No, you don't get to say what constitutes the spectrum of acceptable opinion, right? Actually, these people are able to cater to an audience and make their case in a way that you're going to have to engage with, right? Yeah. Just as you have to, apparently you have to engage with fascism all the time, every day, or at full volume, right? You're going to actually have to engage with people who've got a different perspective, who don't have billionaire backers. And I think that the system is incredibly fragile in a way. I don't think it can cope with very much in the way of dissenting voices.
I think you're right. I think it's incredibly fragile.
They only allow just one Adam Curtis. right?
Yes.
Give me 3 Adam Curtises, and I could check. I could move the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why is the BBC only allowed to have one documentarian in its archive at any one time?
Yeah. I mean, all I will say is if you would like to broaden the spectrum of debate in the UK, you can go to patreon.com/praxiscast.
Oh, nicely done.
Yeah, you can tell the elite, the pig-like elite of this country who's boss with your £5 for 2 extra bonus episodes. I will remind you that podcasting is indeed praxis.
Anyway, but the final point to make, which I think is helpful, is that we're interested in the idea of active and direct participation, right? And what we want to do is have a balance between the forms of participation that everybody can do in a very casual way without it being a huge burden, and forms of participation which are more demanding, which are more resource intensive, but that enable ordinary people to engage in deeper forms of reflection and inquiry and investigation and contestation. And so those 2 powers, like the eligibility to sit on the panels and the ability to give bits of money to media outlets that you like, they will be in dialogue as well, right? So the panels will be able to draw on material they wouldn't otherwise have access to because of this public sort of funding mechanism that we've introduced as well. And similarly, the panels can then publicize the work of otherwise obscure media outlets and say, one of the things we found really helpful in this report about, I don't know, the monetary system or whatever it happens to be, is this work by this little outfit of people working on monetary policy who gave us this really interesting report. So you have forms of discourse that are at the moment not really possible because of the very tight control over the funding mechanism. And even tighter control over the ability to, as it were, deliberate consequentially.
I think this is probably a good place to leave it for this episode. But I think genuinely I would urge people we'll put a description, we'll put a link in the show notes, but to have a read through it. I think there's a lot to think about and to be to be mindful of. And I don't know. I think the BBC, like the British state in its current iteration, is fully clapped out. And I'm not the BBC in its current state should not exist. But I do think there needs to be a state broadcaster, and this is an interesting way of moving that forward. So I think
I would just quickly say as well. Can I quickly say that the report itself is absurdly long. It's 30,000 words, but our friends at Commonwealth have produced a very handy kind of summary, so you can get a sense of the bones of the proposal, and the actual report it's a masterpiece, and you can engage in that as much as you like. I would say as well that there is something called the Media Reform Coalition, which is a group of citizens and interested people who are trying to figure out how to reform the media. There is a BBC working group within the Media Reform Coalition. We are open to, people can join us from anywhere. You don't have to be nominated or elected or anything. You can just come and sign up, and you can be kept aware of what we're doing, and you can engage with the debate. And I really, I think it would be very interesting to see if we can actually crack the silence around the structure of the media. Right? The political economy media it's kind of the most closely guarded secret of any liberal democracy. Right? No one wants to talk about it because everybody who matters is doing fine out of it. And we really do have an opportunity, I think, to break that and use the charter renewal as a lever for trying to do that.
Yeah, I think at a baseline minimum, as this starts gearing up, because these processes is always by the time it's 2027, it's in Parliament, it's too late. It is sort of at least important for people to keep this in the back of their mind, and that this is going on, and that pretty sure pretty soon you're gonna see like all the right-wing outlets go insane over the BBC, and it is for this particular reason. There is context.
Yeah. But also, like the emerging Left Party and the Green Party under a populist leader, if assuming Zach Polansky becomes leader next month, right? This emerging left bloc, in order to be viable, has to have a story to tell about media reform. Right?
Yes,
it's just not possible. It's not desirable for that bloc to be quiet about the media and say, oh no, the media's fine, we're going to have to go out there and we're going to hope we get a fair coverage. They know they're not going to get fair coverage from the existing media system.
Yeah, I think
they know that the system is changing.
Zara Sultana has explicitly come out to say that we are going to fight back against the media this time, which is why she did her first interview with Navarra, I think it was yesterday, was released.
And she put, she put the manners on the "Have I got news for you" Twitter feed,
which was very funny because
which is great.
That "Have I got news for you" Twitter account has not put out anything funny. I think in the entire time I've been aware of its existence.
No. So they're going to have to. We're going to have to develop a story about what we're going to do about the kind of the emerging teal AI. Hellscape that's being prepared for us, right? And the BBC reform agenda is as good a way into these debates as any, I think.
Yeah, I think on that note, Jamie, do we have any comment or commentary, or was it just like too awful for bearing as per the usual now?
The only thing that broke with the mold of small boats was Richard Littlejohn wrote a column about how working from home is the great Satan again. And
Christ almighty.
The first comment on it was...
Did he write it from Florida or like...
probably,
yeah.
The first comment on it was something like, you and James Whale are both wankers. You know what I mean? Hopefully you die soon as well. Because I think James Whale's like terminally ill, so...
Oh, really? Is that right? Well, I'm sad I didn't get to play that game because I would have been brilliant at it and you'd have all been amazed.
Yes.
But, there it is.
Come back on when Britain is more normal.
Yeah, that's a way of saying fuck off, Dan. I never want to see you again.
All right, first we'll do top to bottom reform of the BBC. That should happen in 2028, and then Dan can come back in 4 years.
I'll come back with my exciting plan. I don't know, to reorganise the National Trust or something like that.
Well, that's too woke now. You may have to.
Thanks very much for coming on, Dan. This is
my really pleasure. Sorry about the business with the mics, and thank you for talking me through it. I thought I was in the hands of the most sophisticated scam operation in my life when you said, "Do you mind if we look at your computer and look?" I was like, "Oh my god, is this a long con? I can't believe it."
What is the security number on your credit card? Can you just give me a quick?
Yes, exactly. We need that for the sound levels or something like that.
So thanks for listening. Patreon.com/PraxisCast. 2 bonus episodes a month, like Rob continues to fucking remind you, and yet you do not listen. Twitch.tv/PraxisCast 6:30 on Sundays for streams in which Jamie and Alistair farm bales or some shit. And also t-shirts are available at praxiscast.tmail.com. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.